Good morning. This is Cecil and Blues. Thank you for joining me. Today I'd like to talk about the tutorial improvements on display in Wildstar's free-to-play beta. About 4 months ago, I put out a video detailing 3 big issues I thought could be improved in their tutorial. And I'll get to those issues in specific a little bit later on. But I want to start with general improvements, changes that are extraordinarily positive that I had not considered. Starting right from the beginning, the giant boxes, numbering in 3, make it really easy to select where you want to start. Skipping the tutorial was previously a small checkbox that could be easily overlooked or forgotten. Now, when you're making your 3rd, 4th, or 10th character, it's easy to remember to skip the tutorial if that's your prerogative. The new Novice tutorial is exactly what it should be. A hallway to walk down that triggers a bunch of the tutorial windows for some of the game's most basic control features. Things that most of us probably do on instinct. The voice in this tutorial is charming, but the effects layered on the performance to make her sound like a computer are really harsh.
I had high hopes for you, and you have not disappointed me.
I don't think it needs those effects. Between the Novice and New to Wildstar tutorial, a new cinematic plays and it features a custom greeting for your chosen race, and then there's an interruption from the enigmatic voice of Nexus, asking for your help. This is the first encounter a player will have with Drusilla, and I don't know if it's going to carry any weight for a new player, but for me, I was incredibly touched. I love hearing Colleen O'Shaughnessy's voice. She's just absolutely amazing at conveying emotion through speech. I'm very happy this small little scene is included. The next thing you may notice is that equipment is no longer a part of the tutorial. Instead of coming out of your cryopod dressed in your pajamas, you'll start out in the armor that you would have been given over the course of the Ark ship. Heck, they even trust you with sharp objects right out of the gate. This is a really positive change. Inventory management can wait. Gloves and shoulder items are also provided. Previously, these armor slots were not unlocked until a much higher level. Providing this equipment up front also means that it doesn't need to be given to you as quest rewards, meaning less quests are required, allowing the developers to really trim a lot of the excess bloat. Path missions and lore objectives are part of that bloat, and both have been completely removed from the Ark ship, allowing for the Ark ship's zone to be massively overhauled. The playable space has been drastically reduced to confine players to the necessary and linear pathway that leads them to their objectives. Whole sections have been removed from both Ark ships. The Exile's Bar and the Dominion's Chapel are gone. Bellwalker's storage room and Artemis Zinn's museum are also gone. In the areas that remain, the quests have been streamlined very effectively, with less steps and less specific and confusing objectives. The quests are also better connected into a more compelling narrative. Arguably, the Dominion Ark ship now has the more engaging and cohesive plot. There were some casualties in this bloat. Lots of flavor is lost in the transition, and it must have been really hard for the team to make these cuts. In the long run, though, most of the lost moments are reinforced in the first zones on Nexus, and it makes the tutorial experience much more snappy. In each of the Ark ships, the final combat encounter has been greatly enhanced. There are some simple fight mechanics, and if you stand in the telegraphs, you're gonna die. Whether you are alone or not at the time you face this threat will have a dramatic effect on how hard the encounter feels. In fact, the whole tutorial experience really feels like something that you should be experiencing alone. But the Ark ships are standard zones, and oftentimes you will see other people running around in the areas with you. I worry that on live servers, that the encounter will be trivialized by the presence of a dozen other players. I can appreciate the technical issues at play here, so I'm not going to harp on it, but facing this boss alone was very fun. Finally, as you make your final descent to Nexus, your choice between Zone Number 1 and Zone Number 2 are now side by side, instead of on opposite sides of the map from each other. This is a great change, but it would have been nice to have to speak to one of the commanding NPCs to make your choice, instead of 2 boring terminals to choose from. Also, And I don't know if this is a bug or a feature, but racial specifics don't seem to be hooked up in some cases. My Mordash got the generic landing event into Everstar Grove instead of the Mordash specific landing event. The same happened with the Draken when I selected Crimson Isle, but I did get most of the Granok specific landing when I chose the Northern Wilds. I hope this gets hooked back up for all races. If you choose to start with the Veteran option, you'll skip over all the cutscenes and content up to the landing sequence for your zone, and that zone is determined by your race, and all of these appear to be hooked up to their specific landing zones. In each of the landing zones, there is a ship that will transport you to your faction's alternate starting zone, if you prefer one over the other, or if you have a friend who's playing a different race that you'd like to go through the first couple of zones with. Now that I've kind of outlined everything, I'd like to touch back on my specific complaints from 4 months ago. Certainly the streamlined quests are a huge improvement over the simple changes that they had made during the Invasion update, though that damn vegetable quest is still going to confuse people. It's a little bit more obvious where you're supposed to bring them, but there are arrows literally painted on the floor and floating in the air leading you to every quest objective up to this point in the tutorial. And then there are no signposts on where you're supposed to bring the veggies. And they moved the planners! Alright, let's move on. Tutorial messages have received some revisions. They are still huge pop-ups with really pretty art and itty-bitty teeny words. But many of the early tutorials now include UI elements and instructional art. I still worry that the size of the art diminishes the importance of the words, and I'd bet the majority of players close these windows without reading them. I'm glad these got some attention. The changes I saw will help new players understand their environment better, if they choose to read them. Special movement was my next issue back then, and it's certainly improved. Sprint is now always on, except for in combat, and I did get a tutorial window explaining that. Not much more to really teach there. They did also include a too-high wall in the novice tutorial room that forces you to learn how to double jump. Kind of. The harder encounters at the end of the arc ships also provide the opportunity to learn how to dash and sprint out of telegraphs, as well as using the interrupt learned at level 3 to create a moment of opportunity. I feel like these opportunities could have been better capitalized on with system message pop-ups during the encounter, or maybe voice barks from your commanders, but I understand getting new VO for these main characters would have been challenging and expensive, so again, I understand the technical limitations, so I'm not going to harp too hard on it. But the opportunity is there for the player to teach themselves by doing. As another note on these final encounters, they are quite hard for that stage in the game. I've watched several players die to them. If they need to be nerfed, and I suspect that they will be, please only reduce their damage output. Keep all the mechanics, and keep a high health point pool. Hell, give them more hit points, because there's probably going to be dozens of players, as I mentioned earlier, playing this on live servers as opposed to 1 or 2 on the beta servers. The longer the player has to kind of figure things out in this encounter, the better chance that they're going to land on Nexus with a good understanding of Wildstar's unique and exciting combat mechanics. Finally, there is the level up window. This has been completely neglected. I have to say that this is my biggest complaint from 4 months ago, and it's such a shame to see that it's still in this useless state. This needs tooltips. I'm just going to pull in my examples from my previous video. I want to speak directly to the developers. If there is any way to get this done ahead of free-to-play launch, you should do it. It is absolutely the single greatest weakness present in Wildstar's UI, and the biggest opportunity to communicate new information to players as they gain access to new features and abilities. I can't stress enough how important this one UI feature is for new players, and how glaringly useless it is in its current state. A new player is going to be excited to see this list pop up, and then they're going to be immediately disappointed and frustrated when they go to highlight and find out absolutely nothing about those things that are presented to them in a list. So, in short, The tutorial is vastly improved, but it's missing improvements to a couple of vitally important core systems. The good news is that the new user experience doesn't end with the tutorial, and there have been lots of improvements to the starting areas of Nexus as well. The new user experience had already been vastly improved during the Invasion update, and it seems like again it was smoothed out to be more inviting to new players, which is great. I want Wildstar to be a success. I want this team to be able to continue to tell the story of Nexus. I want to learn the next secret, to see where this journey leads. Or, to put it another way, I want this early game experience to finally be perfect, so that they can devote all of their time and resources into the backside of this world and build new dungeons, raids and adventures, new zones, new stories, new fun. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button. You can subscribe to the channel to be notified when new videos go live, and you can follow me on Twitter @itsboats to see what else I'm up to. How do you feel about tutorials? How do you feel about this tutorial? Are these improvements enough? Were they too much? What games have you played whose tutorials have really worked well for you? I look forward to hearing all of your comments and your thoughts. Go ahead and throw them in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.
Ready to put some exile scum in the ground? Hope you brought a big shovel!